Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Bolt Report for another episode of Thunderstruck. My name is Michael Wax, and I am joined, as always, by my co host, Jake Ricker. Today, we are joined by another very special guest. Our guest was a mainstay at the Tampa Bay Times for 12 seasons or 12 years, writing about the Rays, the Bucks, and your Tampa Bay Lightning. Since 2018, he has been with the Athletic, covering the Lightning from 2018 to 2022, which included two Stanley Cup champions, one in 2020 and the other one in 2021. He is now the athletic writer for the Minnesota Wild and the NHL as a whole, and he had a bit of a crossover yesterday with both of his former covering teams playing one another. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joe Smith. Mr. Smith, thank you so much for taking the time.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Kind of blast from the past here.
Absolutely. And, speaking of the past, we do want to start with how you got your start in sports writing. You do have on your Twitter bio that you are a proud Michigan Daily alum. How did your start with Michigan Daily come about?
Well, as you know, it's a student-run newspaper. There's no like advisors. It's all students sell ads. They're editors. They pick writers. It's a very great proving ground. You've seen a lot of great writers of the past come through there. Mike Rosenberg, Nick Katsanika, obviously Rich Eisen. You see those people that come through the Daily's doors and really have success. And I didn't know what I wanted to do when I started school, like most people as freshmen in college at Michigan. And I was in class one day, kind of a sociology class as a freshman, and I sat next to a guy, and he was reading the Daily, and he had covered that hockey game, that event, and his byline was in the paper. And I'm kind of curious, because I've always been an avid reader, an avid sports fan. Love Mitch Albom, love people in Detroit that I grew up reading. And he's like, "Yeah, I just got started and became passionate about it and wanted to." And they give us opportunities to travel and cover the team. So the next day, I went in and volunteered to write, and I think covered like women's tennis was my first beat, and then covered hockey my sophomore year. And that's really kind of fell in love with sports writing and hockey as a whole, hockey writing as a whole, covering the Michigan hockey team. And Red Berenson was the coach back then. And you walk to practice every day after class. You get in a rental car with the three other beat writers and drive to Ferris State and Houghton and to Sault Ste. Marie and stuff like that for games. And I really kind of fell in love with the act of being a beat writer and kind of having ownership of a team and chronicling their travels and day-to-day drama. And so that's kind of what sparked my interest in career as a whole. And then I became editor, covered Michigan football, did some internships, of course, and a couple different stops at newspapers before I landed in Tampa. And then that kind of sent me to where I am today. But yeah, it was very much a kind of walk in the door and see what I could do and volunteer, and then became a passion. And obviously, making a living out of something you do that you love to do makes life a lot easier. So I'm very fortunate and to get a break here and there, and then be able to work at the Athletic, which is the best sports writing out there, in my opinion, and a lot of great colleagues of mine. So yeah, a little bit of luck, a little bit of breaks here, and a lot of hard work, and fortunate to cover some great teams and great people in Tampa Bay for a long time.
You mentioned coming down here to Tampa Bay, and now obviously hockey is your main thing that you cover. What made you choose hockey as the sport that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, well, I started kind of in a roving backup role for the Lightning, Rays, and Bucks at the time, which can be fun because you get a little bit of everything. You also don't have any holidays off since you're the backup writer for the three sports, so you tend to get those the rough road trips or like the holidays on call kind of thing, which is great. You're a young kid, you would do whatever you need to do. But I really all the pro sports. I really enjoyed both the action of the game, just the product on the ice, to the people and like the access you get covering hockey. I feel like most of the guys are very down to earth and grounded and accommodating and stuff like that, which really helps you in your job. Not that other sport athletes aren't, but I think the combination of that, the schedule, covering hockey too. I covered baseball with Mark Topkin at the Tampa Bay Times, who's been doing it for forever. I don't know how he does. The schedule is such a gauntlet, and I don't think I'd be married if I was covering baseball full time. So combination of that stuff, and it just happened to where there was an opening covering the Lightning since Damian Cristodero left the Tampa Bay Times, who I worked with closely there, and raised my hand, and loved the game and loved the sport, and I got that chance, and then a year later, covering the Cup final.
So when we talk about sports writing, there are a lot of younger kids that are coming up that want to be that next sports writer, that next. You had mentioned guys like Rich Eisen that were, on Sports Center, whether it is an anchor or writer in general. But for writing specifically, what are some of the most important qualities of being a sports writer?
Well, I think the reporting angle is the most important, right? Like there are a lot of people that are not necessarily great writers, but if they report well and interview well and all that stuff, you get the best details where it makes writing the story easier. Like I don't feel like I'm the most talented craftsman of words in the country, but I feel like I really work hard and make the extra call and try to call the most details out of, gain trust from people and kind of build those relationships where you can kind of unearth some of those interesting tidbits and details and make a story kind of sing. So I think what's tough now for the field as a whole is there's not a lot of jobs out there. I got started covering high school sports, which like a lot of my colleagues now and my age and older, that was your entryway into newspapers or writing, is to cover football on Friday nights as a stringer for the Tampa Bay Times or whatever, and just kind of get that experience in clips or writing. That's the most important thing. Is if to be a writer, you have to have experience doing it and test it and try to see what you do well, what you don't do well. So, as far as like what's important, I think is being kind of hardworking, a good listener, curious, determined, because it's not an easy field to get into. So I think it's what's a challenge for writers today is getting into it. There are not a lot of really entryway points into bigger jobs. It's hard to go from not covering anything to all of a sudden covering pro sports, right? But if you can work your way up and show you can be responsible and do the right things in other ways, you can get to those kind of beats. But right now, there's just not many. Newspapers are cutting a lot of jobs of those kind of internships and prep writing jobs. So that's makes it tougher, but you have to have a passion for doing it. Like my first job was in Modesto, California, and 3,000 miles away from anybody I knew. You kind of have to it was a smaller paper, and I was covering high school football and rodeo and whatever I can do and first person stories. And it wasn't the most, the biggest salary, the biggest prestige, but I loved living in Northern California. I loved kind of following my dream, and it kind of led to my, break to Tampa. So I just know that those jobs are few and far between now, but it definitely is a great gig if you can work your way into it.
You mentioned the importance of looking for those story angles. I think one of my favorite part about the articles that you often put out is that you focus on a different side of hockey. It's not always what you see directly on the ice. So I wanted to ask you about kind of what your process is when you're starting to look to find that next story that you're going to work on.
Yeah, you're right. And when you cover a team for as long as I did in Tampa, you're covering the same people for a number of years, right? Like you can't just write one Kucherov story and that's it. Like, you want to cover every certain angle of it. And so I think what I tried to do was try to find different angles of the same people in different parts to them and what makes them unique and different. That's just kind of either as the player or as a person or backstory. Like for John Cooper, I wrote a dozen stories, right? Like one was on his Hofstra lacrosse days. One was his first actual coaching job at the high school team in Lansing, where he went from a lawyer to a coach for the first time and talked to all the players from that team from 20 some years ago. And then, obviously you can do ones on him at the Lightning and his first, time there. So I think I love the off the ice stories. I do love, I'm a nerd too. I like the on the ice stuff and kind of behind the scenes and how things work and the why of things. But I think we cover people, not just kind of machines or names and box scores and whatever. And so I think that really kind of reveals a lot to me about the player, the person, as their kind of path to get there. So that's what I really enjoyed, especially with a new player coming in. I'm like, okay, who's this person? Like, who's the people who kind of shaped him? Who are the people who kind of were instrumental in his or her success? And then kind of the people who usually are those influences around are often the best people to know when you need a big story on a person, right? Because people that know them, they may not be the biggest name people, might be the junior coach, might be a brother or parent or a former teammate. Like those people are some of the best um, resources when you want to get to know somebody versus just asking Stamkos on Kucherov or asking something. I think it's just those are the things that I really had to tap into in 2020 when they went on a Stanley Cup run, and reporters weren't allowed in the bubble, right? Or only a few of them were, and only 4 or 5 of the people were, and I wasn't there, and I was watching it off TV and Zoom calls, and you try to find things that differentiate your stuff and from other people who are in the same Zoom calls, and so basically it's just calling more people that weren't just the player themselves. So that's where I think I felt that I did some of my best work, even though I wasn't there on scene and able to kind of watch with my eyes behind the stuff. So I think I had to kind of work around it and try to find people who had different vantage points of this player.
Talking about the story just in general, it's not just all black and white as you had mentioned, but for you specifically, I know you had mentioned this already. What was it like covering that rodeo in California?
Rodeo? Well, first you had to dress right? Like I couldn't, you had to show up. It was be a day in the sun, so you had to make sure you had like a big cap, and you had to make sure you covered yourself because you spend a whole day out there, you get burned. But I think for me, it was something where I didn't know much about the sport itself. Like, I didn't know the people. They're not like a NHL.com bio on these people, right? And so you kind of had to like learn from the people who are around the group and try to get some backstories, right? It's not a typical thing, but the people who follow rodeo, people who follow that are very passionate, and they care just as much about that as the people who are fans of hockey or football. And so I think it was like a really good training experience of just kind of treating it like another regular sport and just kind of getting whatever they were doing, from bull riding to whatever, to just get to know the person behind the scene and then just kind of get the hell out of the way. But there's Oakdale Rodeo was a big one in middle of California, and it's like a religion and stuff. So I think I did well. I look back the clips again and see what the story was, but between that and football, and I did like first person stories I tried out for an AFL2 team. They open tryouts on Saturday mornings, like at a high school field, and I wondered who the hell tries out for an AFL team and just walks on. And so I tried out for a team, and like I did whitewater rafting and adventure race first person stories, because you could do that at smaller papers and have fun with it. So I was also a little younger too, so I had my body could handle it a little bit better.
We mentioned off the top that you covered the Lightning for nearly a decade and a half, and want to get into some of that time, when you were with them. How did you see the organization change while you were there?
Well, I mean, I think what made big news recently is owner Jeff Vidic selling off big part of his share, and then 3 years eventually being more of a minority stakeholder. And I think, coming in and covering the team in a backup role starting in 2010-11 to that first run to the conference final, I really saw a huge change in the organization on and off the ice from the previous ownership group to the new one in terms of the culture change, right? You have Steve Yzerman, hired Julian Breezewall and Todd Beliwicki. Like all of a sudden they went from a kind of a dead brand to the one that's a kind of a world-class one today. And so it was really cool to see all that stuff change from the players saw it, from the Gary Roberts, the Reckies, the Stamkos, saw a big, huge change in the organizational structure, culture, everything. So all of a sudden now they're kind of the standard in the NHL, front office wise, facilities wise, and that kind of thing. So it was cool to see like the beginnings and then the growing pains of making some mistakes or just trying to find the right guy. Hiring John Cooper was a big transformational thing for them. Some of the drafts that they had, Kucherov and Point, making some of those moves, like to get Vasilevsky at number 19 in 2012. So I think I really enjoyed kind of the roster building and roster constructing stories and kind of how it happened, who was a scout who found this guy, and those were kind of really fun to see how a cup winner was really built, because it didn't happen overnight. Of course, they had a lot of runs, but they didn't get there. From Stamkos took maybe 13 years to win a Stanley Cup. So it was a lot of ups and downs, and that was a lot of fun to cover.
So you've already brought up Nikita Kucherov. One of the big things that we've seen, especially in those 2 years, those back-to-back cup runs, was that you're the first one that comes to mind when it comes to Nikita Kucherov in the press room, specifically after those Stanley Cup runs. So, you got that shout out from Nikita Kucherov during the press conference. What was the first thought coming to your mind when you guys are interviewing, I believe it's Point, Coleman, and McDonough, and all of a sudden Kucherov comes into the room and asks for you and everything like that?
Oh, that was, I think, the second cup, right? I think that was the second one. I think it was.
So the first one was by himself, or the second one was by himself.
Yeah, that was the first one. Yeah, that was in the bubble. Yeah, he was coming in the room after those guys, right? So, yeah, that was I was watching it from my dad's house in Michigan because we weren't at the bubble, and I was just working remotely from anywhere. Yeah, and that was like late at night. Kind of surreal to cover a championship not there and watch it on TV, right? So. I had some stories already written on Victor Hedman because he was a Conn Smythe winner. And then, he just kind of foreshadowed the next year's press conference, which was like, imagine like you just set up for a Zoom call and all of a sudden the person you're going to interview is shirtless, right? First of all, and clearly had a few beers. And then, you have to raise your hand in Zooms, right? So you don't know who gets the first question or what's going to happen. So I raised my hand right before, when they said, up next to Nikita Kucherov, I'd raise my hand, and not before knowing what he would look like, what state of condition he'd be in, and then to get the first question. And so you're just like, well, sometimes the simplest is the best question, not talking too much or trying to give the answer yourself. So I was just like, what are your emotions at a time like this? And like, let him roll. And that's where kind of the 2.5 or 3 minute answer of number one bullshit came through, which obviously went viral for him. But I think what Kucherov is, obviously he's one of the best players in the world. He's probably the greatest hockey mind I've ever been around. And there's been years where maybe he's been standoffish with the media, of course, or maybe not as easily approachable for some people. I've always had a good relationship with him. And I really found that if you end up talking to him, he's one of the smartest. You learn something so much every time you talk to him. He's just a really smart hockey player, and he doesn't mind explaining it to you. A really good appreciation for the game. Like, the guy watches clips of like Kane and Draisaitl after his games. He does all these things that people don't even realize. He kind of was like as much as he's talented, he was kind of a self-made star, right? He was second round pick, and he was kind of traded in junior, and he was, all this other things. He got a chip on his shoulder, but I always enjoyed my back and forth with him, even though sometimes, he can be a little bit prickly, but other times he'll talk to him for 20 minutes or so in the locker room, and you just learn so much about him and his backstory. And then his backstory kind of explains a lot of why he is who he is, and just an incredible talent. Will probably end up being one of the best, if not the best player I'll be covering in my career in hockey. That, and obviously Kaprizov is getting me up there too in Minnesota after watching him.
Kucherov's a special player. We got to experience it firsthand when we got to talk to him during media day. He gave one of his classic, one-line answers. We love him though here in Tampa, no question about it. You've written a lot of articles over the years, obviously with the Lightning. What's one that you're most proud of?
Oh God, it's a tough one. God, they're just so many. I mean, I don't know which ones I'm most proud of, but I think you always want to kind of deliver and like own the moments and like those bigger moments, right? And I think for me, the first Stanley Cup when they won, and I was like many reporters covering it via Zoom and remotely and everything like that. And to have, I had like a story already ready to go on Victor Hedman and his kind of whole career and path to Conn Smythe winner, having talked to his family and been in Sweden previously for a trip, and just really had to have something ready to go and run right when the buzzer happened, so we could have something really fresh. And I kind of already had things in my mind of what I wanted to write as a column off that game. And I really felt that we had just comprehensive coverage of that cup, even though we weren't there, or I wasn't there in person. And so I think that was what that whole run is what I'm most proud of, is being able to do some of the stories that I was able to do without the access that you typically would have if you're on scene and everything like that. Because, like when you cover a Stanley Cup, and that's kind of be the chapters and the clippings that people read, forever, right? Not necessarily like the newspapers, because newspapers, those are the ones they actually hang up, right on your wall and you put it in a frame. So missed that opportunity, obviously not being at paper for that, but I think you want to be able to kind of catalog it kind of like a book a team is running. So I think that would be one of the more proud moments I had for that. There are probably more meaningful stories in terms of, affecting change in people and kind of harder news topics that I've covered. But I think as far as, covering hockey for that long and then being covered a cup team in that particular really different circumstances and kind of being on the ball to have those stories ready to go on a night like that when they've been looking for a cup for so long. I think that was really gratifying to me, at least.
You mentioned earlier about forming relationships when you were with the Lightning to get those best answers. And I know you're in your third season not covering the team anymore. So from an outsider's perspective, whether it's with the Wild or the NHL generally, what was the general sense that you got from Steven Stamkos's departure this past summer?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of layers to that one, and I know I did a story with my colleague Chris Johnson last spring that kind of foreshadowed all the kind of complicated factors that went involved when it wasn't the fact that Steven Stamkos didn't want to stay, and it wasn't, I don't think, a fact that the Lightning didn't necessarily want him to remain there. There was just at a certain point, I think Steven Stamkos, he wanted to stay really bad, but he also wanted to kind of feel wanted and feel important going forward. And I think I don't know what the exact offer was, other than what maybe was reported as maybe 8 years times $3 million or something to that effect. Trying to make it work. I think Julian Breezeball tried to make something work, but it's always going to be emotional and difficult for a team and their fans to move on from such a legendary player, and nothing's going to change whether he plays for Nashville or two other teams, what he meant to Tampa Bay organization. He's the best player in franchise history, the face of the franchise for so long, and a big reason why they have had that run of success. But I just think that, the Lightning lost in the first round a couple years in a row, and they still have a core that's gradually getting older that they want to still win around, and they knew that they couldn't just stand pat and not change anything in order to get back to where they needed to go. And so sometimes tough decisions have to be made. And as much as I, as somebody who covered him for a long time, would have loved to have seen Stamkos finish his career in Tampa Bay, much like a guy I watched growing up, Steve Yzerman, one of his idols, to play his whole career in Detroit. I think it's unfortunate that Steven won't get that chance. I know it's important to him, but eventually you need two people to tango to make a deal happen, and it just wasn't enough, I think, probably for Steven to stay. So I can imagine how emotional and fun that'll be for fans to see him come back with Nashville to get that well-deserved Steven Stamkos night, and I don't know how they're going to pull off that video tribute. It's going to be incredible, but yeah, it's a complicated one. We detailed in a story in the spring, just kind of foreshadowing it, but until it actually happened, you're still kind of surprised, even when it does happen. Like, okay, I thought no matter what happened and he hauling back and forth, that it would actually get done, and it didn't. So it is weird seeing him in a Nashville Predators jersey for sure.
It's very weird, and I believe the ovation that he's going to get may even be louder than when the Lightning won the Stanley Cup. That's how much he meant to to Tampa in general. Joe, one of the last things we do to wrap up our interviews is just a little fun segment. We call it the Bolt Reports Lightning Minute. So I got a couple of rapid fire questions for you. I'm going to put a minute timer here on my phone, just some fun things, and then we'll go from there. The most we've ever had answered in the minute timer is 10 by Jason Shogabay, who we interviewed last time. Are you ready to go?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. So I'll start the timer once I finished the first question. Here it is. Favorite place to eat in Tampa?
In Tampa, I like Bella's Italian place in South Tampa.
Favorite sporting event ever attended as a fan?
97 Rose Bowl, Michigan beat Washington State. Went with my dad.
Favorite Lightning personality to interview?
I'll go with Kucherov.
Favorite road arena? Can't be Amalie Arena though.
Bell Center, Montreal.
Coolest event that you've ever gotten to cover?
The Super Bowl.
Favorite off-day hobby?
What's that?
Favorite off-day hobby?
Running or karaoke.
Coolest Halloween costume?
Ninja Turtle.
And favorite candy bar?
Milky Way.
And that's the timer right there. All right, beautiful. Thank you, Joe, so much for doing that. That was a lot of fun. Oh, Michael, I know you wanted to ask. You mentioned karaoke. I know that's one of your favorite activities to do.
Well,
yeah.
Just what is your go-to karaoke song? We didn't hit it on the lightning minute, but
it's changed over the years, right? And it's depending on the crowd. You have to feel your audience, right? For a long time, it was Coolio's "Gangster's Paradise." So that's been something come out in '94. So that's going to date myself, right? So some people don't get it anymore. But I love Basket Case too from Green Day, and Run Around Sue. So depends on what the mood of the crowd is. But I think I've sang in like 50 something different cities across the world.
Wow.
So it's something that's really, when I get on a road trip and stuff like that, it's always, I look for where the karaoke bar is to see if I can find a different spot. So.
Well, that is a great place to end it. That'll do it for us here on this edition of Thunderstruck. Huge thanks to Joe Smith for coming on the show. Make sure to check out Joe's podcast, The Fellowship of the Rings, on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify, as well as your preferred audio platform. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, that subscribe button, and turn on the bell so you don't miss out on future videos just like this one. And we'll talk to you in the next one. Go Bolts!